What is good? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Chuck. Thank you very much for being here today. We like to talk about investing in the Pokemon card market. It feels crazy every time to say that, doesn't it? But these days, it's really part of the norm. Thank you for being here. I hope you've had a great week. Happy Friday. Really appreciate all of the support recently. I want to propose kind of an idea that I've been thinking about. Not really an idea, more of a thought, because on this channel, we preach having a good game plan, having good market fundamentals when we make investment decisions. And I think something to consider is kind of the overall impact of federal interest rate cuts that are expected to begin happening this month. Actually, next week, we are expected to get our first interest rate cut. Now, in my opinion, there are a lot of factors that go into particularly the Pokemon market cycling up or down. There's a lot of mechanics behind the scenes as far as supply and demand. We know for a fact that demand is higher than supply right now. And so, in my opinion, for the foreseeable future, I don't know how long it will be. I do believe prices will continue to just move up. We'll go over a couple products after we go over the stot here. I want to talk about maybe Destined Rivals and Prismatic. Um, you know, it's an interesting thing to think about that's not often talked about in this space because the global market often dictates and has ripple effects on other asset classes. Um, if you don't understand what a rate cut is, essentially it makes borrowing a lot cheaper to do for corporations, particularly. Also affects mortgage rates, things like that, right? Right now, interest rates are relatively high because the Federal Reserve has essentially two mandates. The first is to control inflation. The second is to have a healthy job market. And right now, Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, um, and of course everybody who works at the Federal Reserve, they're essentially concluding that inflation is somewhat under control, maybe a little bit high, but that the job market is wavering. And if you work and have a job, you probably agree. It's pretty hard to get a good job right now, a good paying job, especially. Um, and it seems to only be getting worse. Of course, there are some factors there. AI is causing kind of historical job slashes across markets. I work in tech. It's something I'm somewhat concerned about. A lot of corporations are being forced to implement AI into their workflow. And that's had kind of mixed results so far. Um, so it's really interesting to see. And, historically, rate cuts actually stimulate the economy. It stimulates spending, typically increases inflation just naturally. And there is currently, according to the CMEgroup.com, which is a pretty insightful website, pretty well respected. There is projected to be a greater than 90% chance of a 25 bip rate cut um, on the next meeting. So, I think when I think about how that affects the stock market, how it affects crypto, how it affects ultimately, for the purposes of this conversation, the Pokemon market, um, I do think that there will be more discretionary spending coming into other asset classes. Um, Stock market's at an all-time high. It's hard to buy a house right now. It's hard to borrow right now, and you know all this does is stimulate more spending. So, um, I don't know what's going to happen, but I do think it is another catalyst in a sense, um, or at least an influence, some type of trickle down into the Pokemon market that there's a probability that more money could flood into other asset classes like gold, crypto, Pokemon. I do believe Pokemon is being seen more now as a store of value, more so than before, at least. I think, especially institutional investors primarily look at gold, they primarily look at crypto for that. But you have seen a lot of news articles come out recently talking about Pokemon being an investment vehicle. And I think opportunity cost is dropping. Lower bond yields, lower savings rates. People are probably going to turn more to Pokemon, a 30 plus year old IP, the number one IP in the world. And I think, scarily enough, I think there's potential that there is going to be more confidence in the Pokemon investing space. I have confidence generally speaking, but this is one aspect I think is going to contribute significantly to Pokemon going forward. And, when we think about what could, how Pokemon could re-enter some type of down or bear market or whatever, whatever you want to say, um, you can't ignore the implications of an economy that maybe isn't super strong. I'm not saying the U.S. market isn't strong, but there are some pretty glaring weaknesses. And the Federal Reserve, they've been trying to avoid a recession for the greater part of 5 years now. So, I think that this will continue to cycle into Pokemon. And actually, if you look at some of the other rate periods of time where rates were different, you can look to 2018 to 2019 to start. Rates were relatively high. Pokemon was relatively flat. Now, I know COVID kind of changed a lot of things for it, but during 2020 to 2021, actually, rates were close to zero. We had trillions of dollars in stimulus be injected into the market. Logan Paul, the sealed vintage booster boxes went crazy. Pretty much all of Pokemon went crazy at that point. It was really like the first major boom that we ever had. And it was all fueled by kind of being locked down, nostalgia. We had a little bit of disposable income. A lot of people lost their jobs, I understand. But a lot of excess cash went to something to kind of ease the day to day, right? And that's really when Pokemon started being seen as kind of an investment vehicle. Fast forward to 2022, 2023, the stock market was down, everything was down, rate hikes were happening, inflation was extremely high. The Fed was really focused on bringing inflation down. Stocks were down. If you were investing in 2022, you remember crypto was down, right? The Pokemon market was kind of hitting its bottom in 2023. I would say, and a lot of cards were printed and the demand wasn't there to absorb it. And I think, while I do have a lot of confidence in Pokemon, I do think that there is a lot of things happening as far as like scalpers and sneakerheads go. There's a ton of new organic demand. The IP is growing and the investing space is getting larger, but these are fickle individuals, relatively young, maybe not super invested in the market. They haven't really experienced a downturn, especially in the Pokemon market, because if you started investing this year, it's only been up. So, I don't think we're immune to a downturn at all. I think at some point it will certainly happen, because otherwise boxes that are $400 today at this current rate will be $400,000 in a decade. So, I think if the job market continues to be bad, I do think money can be tighter and discretionary spending will go down. And people will have to focus more on the actual quality of life that they want to live, putting food on the table and that kind of thing. And then, 2024, 2025, right? With rates, like things started to stabilize. And I think there was a little bit more confidence in the Federal Reserve's plan. And so you see a lot of asset classes starting to increase, which is interesting. And now we're having very high probabilities that rate cuts are going to be implemented here. So, my prediction is that, at least for the foreseeable future, I would say 2025 in particular, we're going to have higher prices. And if you look at an item like the Destin Rivals booster box, for instance, people are always saying, reprints will tank it down to zero. Well, there might be a reprint, but at this rate, as long as the habits and discretionary spending habits are the way they are, and there aren't perceivably better places to put money right now, all of these products, singles included, raw cards, slabs, booster boxes, PCTBs will go up, and some will go up at a higher rate depending on what type of product they are and how likely they are to get reprints. Now that I know there's a million other factors that go into how well a set does, right? Obviously reprints, the quality of the set, but people are really shocked that Destined Rivals is $400. Well, we haven't gotten a huge reprint. It's one of the best sets we've gotten in the last couple of years, arguably the best in the Scarlet and Violet era. 151, and I get it, but it's up there, and it's definitely the best booster box. And booster boxes are one of the top investment products you can invest in outside of PCETBs. So, what happens? Well, you don't see a reprint. Demand is still outpacing supply, and you see products go up. And this is happening all across the hobby. There's still a lot of organic demand, but you need to be careful with what you're choosing to invest in, which is why I'm, when I looked at Shrouded Fable ETBs, PC ETBs for $97, I was like, that's a relatively safe play with somewhat limited risk on the downside, being an exclusive product. Well, now it's pushing $200. It feels more buyouty than organic, because in a bear market, when you try to sell a Shrouded Fable PCTB for $200, it's going to be harder to do. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. So, the plan really is the same. We like to target good sets at good prices, because long term, as an investor, you should have the mindset that you're going to be invested for a minimum of 2, I would say 3 years minimum, to weather any volatility in the market. And there will probably be some volatility in the market that trickles down to collectible asset classes, guys, because remember, the value of these products are speculative. There's not a balance sheet. They're not generating dividends. They're not generating revenue. The main mechanic for prices to go up in Pokemon is if the IP gets bigger, and also scarcity, which is fueled by sealed product becoming more scarce over time as products get open, as we all know. So, of course, I'll be making videos on plays in the markets, prices, and market updates and that type of thing, but this is just something I wanted to present today because the news is coming next week. We'll see what happens. We'll see what the Fed says. We'll see how the market reacts. But don't be fooled. This absolutely impacts the Pokemon market. Whether it'll happen overnight, maybe not. But at some point, as months go by, similar to tariffs, you'll probably feel some type of impact. So, again, just another data point, just something I wanted to present. Still believe in the Pokemon market long term, of course. I'm still invested, haven't sold anything. I don't plan on selling anything this year. But 2026, I think, will be a very interesting time. I think the rest of this year will be too, right? Still have a lot of great sets coming out. There's still a lot of organic hype being injected into the market. There's still opportunities for scalpers to make money by flipping. I don't think anything's going to change overnight. It'll be probably a longer process. So let me know your thoughts down below. Very curious to see what you guys think. And I really appreciate y'all watching. Discord link down below. All of that. Like, comment, subscribe if you like. No big deal if you don't. All respect. Appreciate y'all being here if you've made it this far. And I will see you very soon in the next one. Bye.